Welcome to A Composer in His Natural Habitat, a podcast about creativity and music featuring Thomas C. Bagley. Habitat number 4, the Musiconomy, grand piano tastes on a guitar budget. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of A Composer in His Natural Habitat. I'm Thomas Bagley, as usual, and with me today as today's guest host is another of my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Craig Ferrin. Hey, Craig, I'm a little bit nervous because I had a hard time coming up with a pun for this week's title. It doesn't seem like there are many connections between music and money, at least in the English language.
Oh, there should be.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, I grew up in the typical band situation. My father was actually my band director from the time I was in first grade all the way up through my senior year and on into college, and I wanted to be just like him and those type of things. But it's interesting how time changes things. In the world that many musicians grow up, especially those involved in the schools, we grow up learning to do things right. We grow up learning to play the note right. We learn it with the right tone quality. We learn how to play all the notes so we can play it all together. As I became a conductor and a music teacher in the public schools and so on, it was all about, in graduate school, getting the most authentic interpretation. You know, it was all about doing it right. And our school systems are built into that, so we know how we can do things right. And then I had the wonderful twist into my profession. I got the opportunity to come to Salt Lake Community College. And in coming to Salt Lake Community College, I immediately wanted to put the situation in where we do things right. We set up a band, we set up an orchestra, and we teach those kids in band and orchestras all the instruments to learn to do everything according to the standards, to learn to play, to do things right, to do it correct. It didn't work. It really did not work. We ended up having students that were more creative that did not learn how to read music, to do it right. They didn't participate in the band and orchestra programs. They didn't get good grades in the school. Some did, but not a lot of them. And I discovered that they were more creative in wanting to do things their way rather than doing it the recommended way. There were some other challenges in terms of space and some other things. So we eventually started our popular music bands class. Well, it used to be called jazz band, and then it was jazz combos. And then when we started adding the sound design people to the things, it became popular music bands because that's what it evolved into. And this class was so doggone much fun because I stopped saying, we got to do it right. And the assignment became, you've got to create an album's worth of music this semester with your band. How are you going to do it? How are you going to finish it out? How are you going to be creative? What are we going to do about this? And in looking at what the students started to do, I was just, wow. Personally, as a jazz musician, as a trumpet player, I wanted to play my jazz improvisational solos right. And because of that, I was awful. As soon as I let go of this idea of rightness and correctness and got more into the idea of creativity, I learned more in 3 years teaching creativity about improvisation than I ever learned in the 7 and 8 years of playing in my jazz ensembles in college and high school. And professionally, all of a sudden, I learned how to let it go and how to do some things. And now I'm teaching some songwriting classes, thanks to you, Thomas. They're an adventure. And part of this popular music band class where it all kind of started for me is the pop bands I realized they were trying to be creative and want to be, but creativity was messy. It wasn't clean. You couldn't go A, B, C, and get D. There were no right answers. And so for the last 10 years, I've just been struggling to bring some resemblance of order to the creative process, to make it so that it is a creative process, a process that you can use for creative endeavors so that you can be more effective without just winging it out there and going, oh, here it is, let it fly. And I discovered there are methods and principles of good creativity and creative madness that work. And once you understand that, it doesn't whether you're a musician or an artist or a business person or an engineer or an accountant, the principles apply.
That's absolutely true. Creativity does not mean you just do anything. It means that you take the attitude, I can do anything, but at some point you've got to rein that in and decide what's actually going to be effective and work among all those possibilities that are out there, because there are more effective things and less effective things, and you've got to find a way to evaluate that.
Exactly. We are so far beyond the industrial age. We are now at the waning ages of the information age. We are now in the age of innovation. And that is going to be the competitive advantage of companies of the United States. Basically, we're in a position in the world. Yes, we've been leading the world economically and in every other way for so many years. It's innovate or die. We've got to be innovators. That's what Americans have done for 100 years. And we're just going to have to keep doing more of it. Because if we're not innovating, the algorithmic work, the widget cutting, the widget doing, all that can be done in the Philippines for 20% of what it costs us to do it here in the United States. And so people, if they're going to be employed in the United States, they're going to have to be innovators. I mean, call it what you will. Yes, that may be a harsh interpretation, but if you don't know the principles of innovation, you're in trouble.
All right, cool. And we'll be talking about that more in the theme of the day. But first, let's get on to what we're working on.
What are you working on?
All right. So, Craig, what are you working on right now?
I appreciate the question because for my 30-year career, I've tried to do things right. And part of doing things right is I've taught a full load at Salt Lake Community College and another half of a load to feed my family and to make it work. And so I have been busy teaching, grading papers, doing all this kind of stuff that needs to be done. Well, I'm here to say right now that going into spring semester of 2022, I've eliminated all my overload. And the reason for eliminating all the overload, the total reason, is so that I can take the time to create. I have dreams. I have dreams of teaching the creative process. I have dreams of using songs and lyrics and poetry and composition to teach. But the problem is I have been grading and
So true.
and grading and not doing any of the creative stuff. And so the first thing I'm doing as far as my creativity is concerned is I'm eliminating the things that are in the way of setting aside the time. As Thomas, as you know, John Cleese, the brain behind the whole Monty Python shtick, said the first thing you need is space. Well, amazingly enough, I've got pretty good space. But the second principle behind creativity you need is time. And you need to set aside time for creativity, and then you need to take that time. Well, I got so involved in teaching and grading music and doing all those kind of things, I stopped being the creator of music. I started studying the principles and teaching the principles of creating music, but that was taking up so much time that I stopped creating music. And one of the things that I really want to do is when I had the opportunity to be the distinguished faculty lecturer at Salt Lake Community College last spring. And as part of that presentation, which was on creativity and the creative process, I wrote what I called an instructional ballad. And if I could use song to teach, oh my goodness, that would be the greatest thing in the world. That once in learning and in teaching, they have what some people call the Feynman technique after Richard Feynman, who postulated that if you're to really know something, you have to be able to teach it to an eighth grader. And he was the Nobel Prize winning physicist, but he was also called the great explainer because he could take all these physics and water them down to a situation that an eighth grader could understand them. And so he understood it so much that he could teach these things. Well, that's where I'm at. But I'm to my twist, instead of the Feynman technique, the Ferrin technique is you need to know something well enough that you can turn it into a song.
That's great. And music is great for that. I mean, music is excellent for memory. When my kids were little, when we lived in Los Angeles, I was going to school at UCLA. We wanted them to be able to know what their address was and their phone number and things like that. Part of having your kids be safe so they can find their way home if they need to at any time. We made up little tunes and had them memorize them to those tunes. And to this day, they still remember their phone number and their address from when they were little kids because there's a melody associated with it.
Because there's a melody. And so if we could teach by now what I'm calling instructional ballads, I really think I could really improve the lives of my students and others who will eventually hear the songs. And it kind of fascinates me to take a book. I'm just going to throw one of the favorite books that we all know is something like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and write an instructional ballad for every chapter.
There you go.
Maybe somebody would open up the book and then they'd see a QR code and they'd put it on their phone. It would come up or something, just something to make it so that the things become memorable. Another side note, on my commute, I'm listening to The Lord of the Rings. And what I am so impressed with is how often Tolkien writes a song their history, their stories are all in these songs that the hobbits and the dwarves and the elves sang. That's how they kept their culture and did their teaching was through song, poetry, and story. Why aren't we teaching like that?
Cool. That sounds excellent. What am I working on then? Well, I, as usual, I'm working on the same projects as before. I had been looking for a story that it pre-existed that I could get the rights to do for my music drama. That process is still ongoing, but it's too slow. So I don't think my first music drama is going to end up being something that from a pre-existing story, just because I need to have something done by the end of my sabbatical. And it may take my entire sabbatical to find a story that I can get the rights to. It's been quite a process. There are some possibilities out there, but I wanted to make sure I had something that I could use at the end of the time. And so I've actually come up with my own ideas and started writing the story to go along with this music drama. I've started it on a song. The main character is a single mother whose husband passed away right before their child was born, basically in a kind of a freak accident. They never found the body, but he's gone. And so this song is near the beginning of the show where she is thinking about her life and where it's gone. And in the play, he shows up kind of as this ghost, kind of just in her mind, basically. She never looks and talks at him, but he's there during the song. He sings with her. So it's a ballad, it's a duet. But she's singing about, just thinking about the plans that they had and then what actually happened in life. And I think that's a very familiar feeling to many of us. You look at where you started and what you thought your life was going to be, and then what came of it. The title of the song is "This Is Not the Life We Dreamed of." And so the story I have is really exciting for me. Um, I hope I get to share it with a lot of people because there's a lot of emotional touch points in there that I really feel like I recognize song moments as those emotional touch points in the story. And so as the story is developing and some of the twists and turns, and you know how opera is, right? I mean, I don't think it's going to be an opera, but if you go back to opera, everything is a twist and a turn, and the storylines just they totally flip on their head and all kinds of stuff. This has that kind of story to it as well. So just when you think you know what's happening, something else happens and it changes everything, and there's a little bit of time travel involved. In fact, the title that I have as a working title for this music drama right now is called Across Time.
All right.
I've been thinking a lot about time lately with what I'm writing about, but also, I mean, with the idea of creativity, right? That creativity is all about time. Giving something enough time to develop. The financial side of things, as we talk about the financial side of creativity, a lot of times we don't give our creative ideas enough time. They've got to have time to percolate and develop and become what they're going to be. And then to get the economic result of creativity, often you have to wait for that. It's not coming immediately. It's going to take a while before you really get the full benefit of any creative idea. And I think a lot of our creative ideas don't succeed in life, not because they weren't great ideas and we weren't creative enough about them. And
Right.
It's that we don't give them enough time. And it's hard to be patient. But that's the currency that we use in creativity. We invest time, and then if we have enough time to invest, then we can see some of the benefits of that creativity.
I've never heard it put that way, but time is the currency of creativity.
Yeah.
I really like that. Like also, when you were telling me about your story there, it just reminded me of the statement, the life is what happens when you're making other plans.
Yep, exactly. I've thought of that line too. I'm not going to use it. It's been used, but I've thought about it.
But it's a good statement.
It really is. And that's where she's at, where the story starts. And then it finds out that she doesn't even know what's been going on in her life, which is really kind of fun and interesting, and all the twists that go on with that. I'll save a lot for other episodes. I'll give little bits.
Keep tempting us.
That's right. And then you'll all want to go see the show, hopefully, which the plan is that those of you that don't know, in order to get the sabbatical, I had to have a plan for something I'd be working on. And the plan behind that was to have the music written by the end of the sabbatical, most of it, and then to mount the performance the following year at Salt Lake Community College in some way. And there's more details behind that. But hopefully those of you that are in the Salt Lake area, and I'd like to be able to broadcast it personally. I mean, since we own the rights to everything, it'd be great if we could do an internet broadcast of it as well. So anybody who's interested can have an opportunity to see the premiere performance of this work that I'm just getting into the journey on right now.
That's awesome.
All right. So that's what we're working on. I've got a textbook that nothing's changed much there. Well, there's been some forward progress on that, I should say, as far as getting that published and things like that. But I'll save that for a future episode because I think things are still in the works there.
We're still percolating.
I'm investing my time. That's right. All right. So let's go on to the questions. All right, so we have one question this time to discuss, and it's a good one. Rob asks, in your opinion, why do some songs that don't seem as well crafted gain lots of popularity and money, while other composers and songwriters seem to create great songs but can't seem to get noticed? That's the $1 billion question right there, isn't it? Or the lack of $1 billion question. What do you think, Craig?
I'm just going to start talking, and hopefully it comes out. That comes down to, we're talking economically, I guess, is that sometimes there's the question, do you do what you love and hope somebody likes it? Or do you find out what other people need and want and craft your creativity around that? And I think so often we have some really great musicians in the world that craft music because they have the understanding of what good craft is and what good music is and these type of things, but they create it and then hope that somebody likes it. And no one likes it. I mean, excuse me for saying this, but it reminds me of when I was doing my doctoral work. I had a theory class and we were going through set theory. And I had this wonderful piece that my professor gave me called The Words of St. Paul. And it was the text was basically 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the big chapter on love and unconditional love. And so I went and I did the analysis and everything. I could see all the sets and see all the rows and how they interchanged. And I did this big analysis and everything you're doing it. And then I listened to it and went, instead of love, this is from hell.
Oh, boy.
Here's this perfectly crafted piece, and it sounded terrible. And so should we say the circulation of this particular piece was probably pretty minimal. It was obviously well crafted because the theoreticians and all this weren't analyzing it as this landmark of music things. But in terms of scope and who's listening to it, only the really refined people are listening to it. And so I have my doubts that the composer, I believe it was Luigi Dalla Piccola, asked himself and said, okay, he might have done that. He might have said, who am I writing this for? And he said, well, I'm going to be writing it for a bunch of academics that are really into serialism. And so this is going to be a hallmark piece for them. But in terms of the larger picture, who's ever heard of it?
In my textbook, I spend a chapter talking to composers about theory and about some of these issues and things like that. And I've come to the decision, as I've been teaching now theory for over 15 years, that first of all, theory doesn't teach you to compose music.
No.
There are a lot of people who are really good at theory who can't compose at all.
Right.
Because the way we teach theory is not teaching creativity.
Well, you got to do it right.
It's doing it right. It's following the rules, as we talked about, right? It's learning, but it is learning grammar.
Yes.
And that's why it's important, because can you imagine trying to write a novel without understanding the English language and how it works? Well, that's what it's teaching you, is to be aware of how things sound and in detail, how things work. What is the experience of the audience dealing with the different kinds of things?
Yes.
And in the 20th century, there was a whole lot of experimentation in that area. And the approach, especially in the 1950s and 60s, was we're going to do a bunch of experiments, and we don't care if anybody listens to this. There was an article out there, and I'll have to find it and put it in the show notes, the link if I can find it. The article was called "Who Cares If You Listen?" by a composer by the name of Milton Babbitt. And his point was, we don't care that we don't have an audience for this music. We are like the nuclear physicists. We are going to understand nuclear physics so well that it's going to trickle down to you. You're going to benefit from this. You're not going to listen to my piece of music, but you're going to hear a film 3 years from now that uses some of the techniques that I developed, and it's going to be, the music's going to be in that film. And it really happened.
Yeah.
If you watch a horror film, there's some great serial music that's used sometimes to underscore some horror films. But that was the focus.
The composers in the ivory tower became research scientists so that they could live and so that they could research without threat of extinction in the open market.
Yeah, and I think that the downside of that, of course, is they lost their market altogether.
Right.
And so a lot of composers who wanted the academic training, there became this big chasm, this big gap between academic music,
yes,
and popular music. And never the twain would meet again, right? That was the basic idea.
Right.
But then we had the generation that grew up listening to John Williams, Star Wars, and things like that, and we grew up saying, you know what? I really want to communicate something with my music, and I want somebody to hear what I'm saying.
Right.
And so that's been an interesting challenge for generations to follow that want to write real quality music, and really want to, put in the time to create really creative, high quality music, and then they're trying to recapture that audience that went away and it was listening to 1950s rock and roll, same 3 chords over and over again, and or the blues progression basically is what the 1950s was made up of. And so, how do you recapture an audience from that? How do you make that work? And that's a challenge. I think part of the thing that we need to understand, and something that we don't talk about enough, I think, what are consumers buying?
Right. Exactly.
What are they buying? Why would they go to a concert? They're buying an experience. They're not buying quality music. They're not thinking, oh, I got to buy this music because it's really important music. I'm going to buy this music. No, they're thinking, hey, you know what? I want to go to a concert. I want to have a little fun. I want to relax. I want to forget about what's going on the rest of my life. I want to just,
Yep.
And so they're buying that experience. Now, classical music, people who love classical music, they're buying the same thing.
Same thing.
But they're going back to the 19th century and 18th century to get it, because that's where they know they can find it. They can put on a little Mozart and just kind of relax and have a nice atmosphere in their home. They're creating, again, that experience of listening to that music. And so I think it's important for us as composers today to realize that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And to create that musical experience that the consumer is looking for, whatever that is.
I hate to say it, but when it comes to economics, we've got to consider empathy first. We've got to consider our audience first and foremost, and then bring to them what we can bring to them. But if we keep doing what we want to do without regard to it, I mean, what was it? Hello, Dolly. Movie says you need to create something that people need every single day to make $1 million.
That's true. Especially at the rates they pay in music now, right? I mean, you put hours and hours and hours into a track and you get it out there and you're like, okay, good. I'm going to put it on Spotify and the whole world's going to listen to it. And 1,000 people listen. Like 1,000 people. Can you imagine, Craig, at one of our concerts, it's like having 1,000 people show up? I mean, we wouldn't have room, right?
Right.
We wouldn't have room for 1,000 people. 1,000 people show up. Great. How much money did I make? Oh, about $10. A little bit less than $10. And that's to be split up among everybody that helped to make the piece of music too. Because of the way that it's distributed. And again, there's a history behind that too, right? We're going back to terrestrial radio. And the radio, when it was a new thing and they were broadcasting music over the radio, the artists were looking at it going, oh, this is a great opportunity. We're going to get our music heard, and then people will buy our recordings. So we're going to use radio as an advertisement for the recordings that we make, and then they'll buy them. And it worked. It worked great in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even the 80s. It worked wonderfully. Even the 90s. People would be like, oh man, I heard this song on the radio. I'm going to buy their whole album. And because this group is awesome. I love the experience of listening to that song. So they buy their whole album. Well, what happened? It all changed. Now nobody buys recordings anymore.
Right.
I ask my students, they're musicians. I say, do you guys buy recordings? They're like, no, why would I do that? I got Spotify. I can listen to whatever I want, whenever I want. I don't have to pay for it. And so that's created an economic challenge for a lot of artists. And there's a positive side to that where you can get the music out there. It's very easy to get your music on Spotify. I've got a lot of my music on Spotify and on YouTube, and it's all out there and people can hear it and it's great. And a lot of people have heard my stuff. I hope even more we'll hear it in the future, but it's still based on that radio model.
Right. Exactly.
They're not paying what it's worth.
Nope.
They're saying, hey, we are exposure for you guys. And that's what we've always been. Oh, sure. Now they can choose to listen to your song on purpose instead of it just being pushed at them.
Right.
But we're not going to change that model because it costs us too much money. You put us out of business if we paid what it was worth for all the music we had on our services. Yeah, that's the problem, right? I mean, the problem is at some point, we got to say this system is not working. Now, I think that there is a solution for it. At least as an artist, what we need to do is we need to do what the authors did. See, authors ran into this problem with libraries. And I think the library model is the way to look at services like Spotify. Because people will go read books from the library. They won't pay for them at all. And the library buys a certain number of copies. I really wish that there could be a way to work this out, right? So your streaming service buys a certain number of copies
Right.
that they have available, then people can go listen to. And they can't listen to it if all the copies are checked out.
Yeah, there you go.
Part of that's in there a little bit, right? Because you do get some mechanical royalties for the streaming services that you wouldn't get with terrestrial radio. So part of it's in there. It's just not enough money yet. But I think if we use it like authors, a lot of them have worried in the past at least, about writing books and then getting it in the library. And you have 70 different people reading your book for the price of one.
Right.
But I think it's been a boon to them to have libraries. I think it's gotten more people reading and more books have been sold because of libraries. And you just have to write something that people, when they read it in the library, go, wow, that was so good. I think I'm going to buy all of this author's books.
Right.
and even though all of the author's books are in the library, they like you so much, they're willing to buy it for themselves still and give them value in that way. So I think that's the way to look at this is look at it with the library model.
Library model is an interesting twist. I kind of like that, Thomas.
And hopefully, you can find ways to give people value, reasons to buy and own things. And I guess part of the problem is it's digital too, right? I mean, people would buy books because they loved having, and they still do. They still love having that physical book. Well, our answer to that in the music world is vinyl, believe it or not.
Right.
Because if they really love the band, they'll buy the vinyl, they'll take the digital copy and listen to the digital copy. And they'll put the vinyl up on the wall.
There you go.
So that's one of the ways to do it. All right. So hopefully that answers your question, Rob. I'm sure there's a lot. It's such a deep topic. We could talk a whole show about that.
A lot there. We can do show after show.
I think the key for composers and for artists is to really be aware and think about what value you're providing, what they're actually buying from you, and what do you have to sell to them. That they want. There's a way, I think, with creative solutions, creativity, put the time in. With creative solutions, you can find a way to provide for an audience what they are looking for while you still have the outlet that you're looking for as an artist.
Yes.
All right, moving on then to our topic of the day. It's time for the theme of the day. All right, for today's topic, basically today's topic is the creative economy. That's why we have you on here, Craig, to talk about the creative economy. It's something you've thought a lot about in terms of as a teacher. You've made some presentations at Slick about it. I always have to explain the title, but I don't think I have to explain this title. This is the first one out of 4 episodes where I haven't really had to explain the title of the show. The Musiconomy, the music economy, there's my pun. I have to get a pun in there somehow.
Yeah, there we go.
And then grand piano taste on the guitar budget. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Yay, I finally came up with a pun that people can understand. All right. So, Craig, to start off today's topic, let's talk about just the idea. So there are some articles, and you and I have read them and shared them back and forth. There's some real thought out there among economists that the 20th century was all about knowledge or information.
Yes.
It was a knowledge-based economy is what they called it. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, they say that the economy changed. And now the world economy is based on creativity instead of knowledge, which is interesting. What does that really mean?
Well, we've worked through the age of information into the age of innovation. See if I can remember the name of the book. Basically, it was written by a guy who was in the beginning of the computer age. The book is called The Inevitable. And he had watched the computer age go for 35 years. He was a young person when all first started. I mean, he was kind of right in the middle of it. And then from his position at being 65, he said, these are the trends that are already in place. This is what's going to happen. He said it's going to happen because it's all in place. And he had his reasons for stating these things, but the last chapter was one of the greatest. Is he basically said something to the effect of, in an age of information, when information is readily at our fingertips, this great progress is going to be not in the information, but in the questions we ask.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
It's the questions that we ask that are going to change the world, not the information, because we have the information. We've got to be able to ask the questions. And the thing with the creative economy is I firmly believe that creatives are going to be the last people standing. If you're just doing policy and procedure work, you're in trouble because all that will be automated. It'll be automated to computers or technology, or it'll be automated to the Philippines. I mean, it'll be sent to the Philippines where people can do it for nothing. Well, by comparison to the United States.
It certainly makes our global economy more global, right? The fact that we can, especially information, can be transmitted so quickly. And already they can translate it without any effort almost to the point.
Yes.
And so there's no language barrier. There's no distance barrier for any of this information. Anybody can follow instructions.
Yes.
There's nothing that's going to keep them from following instructions. So that globalizes our economy. It's going to bring countries like the United States, if we don't adjust and adapt, the amount we have to pay is going to be brought down because there are other countries where the cost of living is lower, where we can get the same value or the same work, at least more value, can get the same work done by people who don't need as much money because of the cost of living. And so that's going to change our way of living as a result.
Exactly. But Roger Martin, I can't remember what his position was. I think he worked at the University of Toronto. He wrote a book called The Design of Business. And he talked about what is called the knowledge funnel. That any information or anything that has ever started starts out as a mystery, or it's just an idea. There's nothing to it, really, other than the fact that it's this idea. We don't know what it is. We don't really know what the fruition is. It's just an idea. And he calls those mysteries. And there are people that explore the mysteries. You were talking about the composers in the ivory towers. They're exploring the mysteries of these particular concepts. Well, through experience, through time, through research. And he refers to the research and doing things by experimentation and innovation. He calls that heuristics. So first you've got mysteries, and then you've got the heuristics that it gets funneled down. And eventually the knowledge, this could be over 30, 50, 100 years. Eventually the knowledge becomes an algorithm. And when it becomes an algorithm, it becomes readily repeatable. It becomes marketable. It becomes, what's the term? Replicable. But the problem with algorithms is, again, they can either be done by technology or by people where it doesn't cost as much to live. And so people in the United States are going to have to be working with mysteries and with the heuristics. Computer programmers make good livings because they are creating the algorithms. As an artist, as a musician, we have to be exploring the mysteries and the algorithms and experimenting with new kinds of creating stuff so that we can create music that can be recorded, because once it's recorded, then it is an algorithm and it can be sustained and sent elsewhere.
That's really interesting in two regards there. First of all, one thing that I've observed is in the programming realm, that's becoming more like an algorithm now.
Yeah, okay, yes.
They have programs that write programs for you, basically, right? I mean, you look at game development, for instance, and they have these game engines. Unreal is one of those game engines, and where you can create a game without knowing how to program.
Right.
Because they've already created the game engine for you. You can focus on the artwork and on the broader idea-based things than the functionality of the game so much, as at least at its lowest levels, because that's taken care of by the game engine. On the music side of things, they've come up with algorithmic music now.
Right.
It's a big thing about Spotify that some of the music on Spotify is not created by human beings. It's created by computer programs that were written by human beings, and they're following this algorithm. Now, these algorithmic programs that they create this music, they can't make value judgments about the emotional content or anything like that. All they can do is compare it to existing music and say, does this follow the patterns that have already been discovered? And so it's really good at creating hip hop and R&B kinds of things that where it's been established what this is, and it's really easy to analyze, and they can create new ones that follow that pattern. And so even in the creative fields, we see this happen, where it starts as a mystery, you experiment, you develop, and then eventually it becomes something that even a computer can do.
Eventually. And in time, the only problem with this particular day and age is that that time frame is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. From mystery through heuristic to algorithms, it gets shorter. They used to be that it took us 100 years to get from the wax cylinder of Edison to the CD and the replicability and those type of things. It took 100 years to get there, but now where are we at? It just
it's changing every year now, and the way we distribute music and listen to it. Yeah.
And so composers, musicians, we're going to have to be much more creative and be working farther and farther up the knowledge funnel, more to the top, more to the mysteries, more to the thing. The problem is only algorithms can be really expanded and replicated. And so it becomes a whole different type of a working model. Composers, are we working in traditional project management or are we working in agile project management? As composers and artists, we've got to be working in an agile environment.
So define for us, for those that haven't studied Agile project management, talk a little bit about what that is.
Traditional project management is we know where we are, we know what we want to happen, and we know how to get there. It's just a matter of setting up the system to get us there. And with those kind of projects, you can set a budget. You know that there's all these elements. We know if we do all these different types of things, we're going to get a budget and we're going to be able to say, it's going to cost us this. We're going to be able to sell it for this. We make this profit. But with Agile project management, actually the Agile Manifesto was actually developed at Snowbird in 2001. It had been coming up, but that was the day of the Agile Manifesto, where is there for projects that you kind of know what your target is, but because software back then and development of artistic projects and creative projects, you don't really know what it's really going to look like in the end. And you don't really know how you're going to get there.
Or how long it's going to take.
It's not a nice little traditional package. It's a different type of management where the computer programmers, the computer people started to say, okay, this is where we're going, but we're willing to invest this amount of time and this amount of money. We're going to work it to see how far we can get with this amount of time and this amount of money. And then we're going to reevaluate and say, okay, this is what we've learned. How much are we going to be able to invest into the next stage? So it becomes, instead of a project understanding, it becomes an experimental, okay, we're going to take it this far, then this far, and it becomes a very iterative creative process rather than a project. And face it, when we write a song or we compose something, we usually don't know what it's going to sound like before we finish it. And so it becomes an agile project to say, okay, well, I'm going to invest 2 weeks. I'm going to invest 80 hours on this.
See where it goes from there.
See where it goes from there. And then I'm going to do another 40 hours on this and see where it goes. And so it becomes iterative over and over and over again. One of the things that I like, my dad, I remember telling me, if a job's worth doing, do it right. And recently I'm starting to say, if a job's worth doing, do it again and again and again and again and again. In other words, write the song, do a quick prototype, get the song out there, get some feedback, do it again, get some more feedback, do it again, do it again. So I think artists work a lot better in the agile world than they do in the traditional project management world.
Which is great news for us creative people, because hopefully there are people out there in the business world, the ones who have the money to invest in this kind of thing, that are looking at this going, okay, I need somebody who knows the creative process to help me through this. And hopefully that means that on your resume, that you have this creative background. It's so funny, people think of musicians as creative people, but you and I have talked about this before, about how musicians, and we introduced the show with it, how musicians are taught to follow instructions.
Yes, we are.
I remember a story Michael McLean told. I think it was Michael McLean who told this story, a songwriter. He talked about how he had a piano instructor, and the piano instructor would put like a $5 bill on the piano or something like that. I can't remember how much it was. And said, okay, if you can play this hymn perfect, without missing any notes or changing anything, then you can have the $5 bill. And he never got the $5 bill because he just could not do it exactly the way it was written. He was very creative, very good at making changes that sounded good.
Yeah.
But to play it exactly as written, some people are better than that than others.
I mean, I don't want to put down people like the Utah Symphony for their skill, but basically they're highly skilled algorithm workers. They put the music in front of them, play what's on the page. Yes, they have all sorts of training that tells them how to play that according to those instructions. And that's a highly skilled, but unless they're taught to improvise or they're given a little bit of license, it's here's the music on the page.
We used to joke in high school about asking string players to play jazz,
Right.
It just wasn't going to happen.
That's still a joke.
Yeah.
Who was it? Somebody said, just ask them to count to 4 because they play all their music. They never have to rest for longer than 4 counts. So,
That's true.
So ask them to count above 4 and they can't do it.
That's why you don't encourage trombone players, because they've had 78 measures to come up with something different.
That's right.
All right, cool. So this is great. This is great news for people who have that creative bent and that creative interest. But at the same time, it's pretty challenging. Money people are notorious at being risk averse, right?
Yeah.
If they have the money, it's because they are really careful with their money.
Right.
So how do you, this is something that I run into all the time as a composer, right? The work I do is often for other creative people. Like I get hired by a film producer and he's creating something creative. He's creating a film. And I'm just a piece of that, and I'm bringing my creativity to add to this creative project. But so many times, these films, they're under budget. They don't have the financial resources to really be what they can be. How do we, as creative people, get the funding necessary for our creative projects to be able to be agile and to reach the potential of what these things can be?
To use your analogy from a little earlier, I think we need to draw on the situation of time. And when I say that could take 5, 6, 7, 10 years, is I think the people with the money and that are very careful want to see what you've done in the past. In other words, what type of a portfolio have you done? What have you done with the money that has been spent on you thus far? What has been the return? They'll want to see a return. Why are they willing to pay John Williams $2 million for a film? Because they know any film that he does is going to make 20 million relatively. It's going to have a return. And that comes with time. It comes to start small. Here's your $2,000. In the business world, is this $2,000 that we invest in you going to give us $4,000? If you're a composer and you do the music for this game and we pay you $10,000 for this music, are we going to get 30,000 more sales because it has this great music in it? And that comes from a track record. And that, I think, takes time to develop. But then using this analogy, I talk to 18-year-olds and I ask them, okay, so let's say you go into law and you become a lawyer. How old are you going to be before you start practicing law and making money? And they say 30. Well, that's 10 to 12 years from now. And if you're a doctor, a CPA, anything else, if they're 18 years old, they're going to be 30 before they start making it. Well, how much of a track record can you build in 12 years from the age of 18 to 30? Can you start doing that now and developing small projects to begin with, developing a track record that shows some economic viability? You can probably make a living by the age of 30, 35.
It's a real challenge. We've solved some of these issues in some of the projects. You and I worked on, for instance, the album from Eloquer, Take Flight. People would be amazed to find out we spent less than $100 on that album.
Yeah.
Of cash. Now, where we fell and why a lot of people don't know about the album is because we didn't have a budget for advertising.
Exactly.
I've been advertising it by word of mouth and by using social media. I've been a one-man person doing that basically for several years now. The following has been growing little by little for that album, but I should have just taken some of my own money. And you have to solve the advertising budget problem too. You can't just throw the money at it. You've got to be very targeted. So
Right.
part of what I've been doing during this time is I've been finding out what kind of people respond well to that. It's to find out who likes that stuff, who likes that experience. Find out what kind of people like that experience, and that's where the targeted marketing comes in. And that's when you can start to show some economic viability. So you have to have people that are thinking about all this kind of stuff as well. It's not just creating your project. One of the things that we do in our music production class that I've tried to do with my students, and they don't all catch on to it, but when they do a proposal for a project for that class, and it's a project-based class,
right?
We ask them more questions than just, what are you going to make? We ask them, okay, does it need art?
Ooh.
Does it need cover art, right? How are you going to get that? How are you going to distribute it? How are you going to market it? All those things you need to be thinking about from the very beginning, because they take, especially when you don't have any money, they take more creative response than any part of it, really. How do you get the word out there? How do you get people to listen to your music? How do you get that following? When you don't have a whole lot of money, that takes time. Everything takes either money or time. And when you don't have money, you got to use time. But, the reason we were able to produce the album for less than $100, and, it's a full orchestral recording. How do we do that? Well, we gave ownership of the album to everybody who worked on it. Now, they haven't made any money off of it yet, but they're going to, I hope. The promise is still there. The contract is there. We signed a contract with them so that if any money comes from it, and I believe that it will happen, we're going to find them and we're going to pay them. It's just a matter of time because we didn't have any money. So that's what you do to get people to work on it. If they have to believe in the project, they have to believe it's worth their time. And be fair with people. Don't just say, hey, I don't have any money. Can you do music for my film anyway? Don't do that to people.
Yeah.
That shows you don't value them. You're just thinking about yourself.
Right.
You can be honest with them. You can say, you know what? I'm just starting out. I have this creative idea. I really believe it's going to turn into something, but it might take a while.
Yes.
I want to be fair to you, but I don't have the money to pay you right now. If you could put some time into this, I will give you a percentage of what comes back from it. And if you can, and a lot of people, some people will turn that down. Some people won't be able to do that, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But at least you're being respectful of people and the effort and the time that they put in to being there, even if they're just there for a recording session and playing the notes on the page.
Right.
You're still being respectful to what they're doing for the project.
And their value. Yep.
All right. Let's talk about education then. You're an educator. I'm an educator. How should schools change the way that they are doing things to better prepare? Because you talked about that. We've been trained to follow instructions, to do it right. The way that math was taught for all those years. Algebra. If you do this, you see this, you do that. A computer can solve an algebra problem the way that I learned it when I was in school. So how can we as educators in schools, how can we change the way we do business so that our students come out with the ability to do creative problem solving?
Since you brought up the idea just recently, you brought up the concept of math, story problems. Let's talk math. Here's the scenario you're going to work with. You've got a warehouse of apples that have to go from Washington to Oklahoma. How are you going to get them there, and how much is it going to cost? How many trucks do you have to have? What are the costs per trucks? What are this? What are you going to pay for the refrigeration, this, that, and the other? And so I end up working a problem and solving a problem and innovating a solution rather than here's the answer and making that happen. Again, it goes back to what we talked back a little bit earlier. What's the question? It isn't the quality of the information, it's the quality of the question that goes there. And I think it goes very much with our artistic situations is here's the scenario. What are you going to do about it? In our popular music bands class, okay, as the teacher, I could stand up and I could throw the music out in front of them and say, this is the music you're going to play this semester. Or I can say your assignment this semester is to create 50 minutes worth of music that you're going to perform in concerts and we're going to record. That's it.
Is it? Yep.
That's it. Okay, what are we going to do? And then we can work on processes and methods for developing a scheme, developing a plan, developing ideas. Sitting there in class in popular music bands and somebody plays a lick and you go, oh, that was cool. What if you do that 4 times? Okay, let's change the key a little bit. I've seen these students in an hour completely structure a brand new piece of music creatively. Yeah, they need to practice it to finish and add some refinements. But in an hour, they've got it structured and no one told them what to do. They started with a germ of an idea, developed it, added something, added another thing, and pretty soon they've got a new product.
The challenge there for a teacher, we've talked about this with, for instance, a lot of our students we see really don't have writing skills, right? English classes have turned into read literature and find some themes to talk about from the literature instead of learning how to write. Right?
Exactly.
And the reason I think behind that, and that the reason we don't teach creativity in general, is it's harder to evaluate.
Yes.
It takes more of your time as a teacher to evaluate.
It does.
And because you have to be more flexible with the answers that you'll accept. It's so easy to have a computer program that takes that multiple choice answer and says, oh, you missed A, you put C, the answer was A. Instead of asking even why they put C, it's just, you didn't get A, so you're wrong. But with creativity, C might be right if you look at it a different way sometimes. And so you to be more flexible with the answers that you would accept. And that requires more teacher buy-in and more time on the teacher's part. You and I have bemoaned to each other the amount of time involved in grading, where we don't feel like we're doing any teaching with the grading even. It was just, a lot of times it's just because we don't even know if the students are looking at what you give back, because they're used to the right and wrong answer. Oh, I missed that. They don't even ask why. They're just like, oh, I missed that. And go on and say, darn it, I missed 25% of everything out there. I'm just awful. Instead of, okay, why did I miss that 25%? They don't do that.
We can call everything that we do, we can call it creativity, we can call it innovation, we can call it problem solving. It's the same thing. Here's the problem that we're faced with, or here's the challenge. Here's what we can do. How are we going to make it through this? I think sometimes in our schooling, we're trying to be preemptive, giving them the skills of what to do before it actually comes up with. And then when they hit something that's not within that nice little thing of what they've already learned, there's the, instead of saying, okay, what's the creative process? Here are some steps. Here are some policy. Here's some of the procedures. This will get us through. Run it.
Yeah, I think one of the keys, and this is going to help teachers, this is going to help students, and this is also an important creative skill. And the key is to define the parameters of whatever they're supposed to do really well at the beginning, not in terms of this is what you're supposed to come up with as the answer, but these are the parameters your answer must fall between.
Right. That's Agile.
That's Agile, right? Think of it as a composer. Let's say I'm writing music for a film, right?
Right.
I could write a beautiful, sweeping, grand, gorgeous melody with all kinds of strings and epic horns and just beautiful. But he put that up against maybe a scene, in which a guy is digging around in the dirt with a spoon. It's just not going to work. There are parameters that what your result should fit within, or else, and that's how you evaluate it. You say, how well did what you came up with, how well did that match with the problem you're trying to solve? If you define the problem well, and that's the key, defining the question, asking the right question, define the problem well, and then you can, at the end, you look at their solution and you say, okay, does that solution actually deal with the problem?
Right.
And that's how you evaluate it.
I think that's a great summary. Now, this one isn't new, but I call it the Isaac Newton method. And the reason I call it after Isaac Newton is because Isaac Newton, to paraphrase, said, if some say I have seen further, is because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And so because he stood on the shoulders of giants, I firmly believe that a quick creativity thing is adopt, adapt, create. I don't believe that anything created ever was truly, truly, truly innovative or came out of nowhere. It came from adopting something from an idea here and an idea here, putting them together, adapting it, and then in the process, something new evolved.
It's usually an amalgamation or a blending of ideas from disparate areas that are brought together into a single thing that creates something that we call new. But it really has generations you can look back at. They just come from sometimes really strange places.
Adopt, adapt, create is probably the simplest method for creativity I've ever found. It's simple. Oh, no doubt the design thinking methodology is more extensive, but it's also bigger and more pronounced and has more steps. But adopt, adapt, create.
Yeah, that really does sum it up really well. Well, thank you, Craig.
My pleasure.
How can listeners find you, or how can they get access to things that you've done, your work, or anything like that?
Well, now that I'm going to have time because I've given up my overload, I'll develop a website. But right now, you can just reach me at craig.ferrin@gmail.com.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig. I appreciate the time you put in. This has been a fun conversation.
It has been.
We've had hours and hours of conversations like this together. That's one of the benefits of being your friend, and I really appreciate that.
That we are.
All right. Well, thank you, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and we'll stay in touch.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. In our next episode, we'll introduce a new experimental show feature, shorter off-week episodes in which composers discuss the process behind one of their songs. If you have enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us, and you can be alerted each time we release a new episode. We welcome your thoughts and comments on today's show on our Discord channel, A Composer's Natural Habitat. A Composer in His Natural Habitat is made possible by the support and donations of listeners like you. If you would like to help support the show, please subscribe to our Patreon for access to exclusive episodes and other content. You can also help to support us by checking out our show merchandise store on Etsy.com. You can find it at etsy.com/shop/The Composer's Habitat. Musical themes by Thomas C. Bagley. Special thanks to President Jed Bartlett. Until next time, keep creating.